Dear Julia, Sophie and Emily, my partner's brother has 2 adult daughters. I won't say their age, but they're late teens. He divorced 6 years ago, is estranged from his ex-wife and sees his daughters occasionally. Since the divorce, his relationship with his daughters has deteriorated, and he loves them to bits and wants to play an important role. The family secret is that the girls have a donor father. However, they have never been told this. He and his then wife never found the right moment to tell them. Close family and friends do know. I wonder what your take is on this. Should he and his ex-wife try and find a time to tell the girls, and how? I don't want to meddle, but the situation taints my own relationship with my brother-in-law.
Okay.
It's a very sensitive question, isn't it?
Yes,
and
difficult.
and
Complicated.
difficult. Yeah.
I mean, I think if your husband's ex-wife and your husband came to me, and I would say, yes, it's really important to tell them. And I understand it's a complicated thing to explain, and it might bring up all sorts of feelings for them and for you. Like, I imagine the journey of deciding to use the sperm donor was not an easy one and possibly a really painful one. But if they came to me, I'd say that they are going to find out at some point, especially if other people know already. And you want to be in charge of how they find out. You want to be in charge of the narrative for them. You want to be there to help them with questions or feelings. I imagine you would rather it was you who was there. But the reality is your husband and your ex-wife have not come to us. And I think that you can say all these things to your husband, or you can play them this, but ultimately you can't force him, you can't force his ex-wife to do something that they don't want to do. I mean, particularly his ex-wife. Like, obviously, you can talk to your husband and explain why you think it would be a good idea, what's important about it. And then I think you kind of just have to let go, because otherwise you're going to drive yourself crazy. And ultimately, it's not your decision.
Yes, it's sort of hard to have much to add to that, really. I would definitely agree that knowing is better than not knowing for the children in this situation, and that it's better to come from their parents and not find out by accident, and all the hurt and sort of mistrust that can cause and confusion. If you end up having this conversation with their parents, or they hear this episode, I guess if they notice in themselves a reluctance to have that conversation, then sometimes you can take the step behind that step and get curious about why. What are your fears about what would happen if they found out?
What's your fantasy?
What's your fantasy? What did it mean to you having to do the sperm donor process? If you can unpick a bit, if they can unpick for themselves, never quite finding the right time isn't quite another way of saying avoiding something because something about it was difficult. Because obviously that's something you can find the time with if you make that decision. So there must be something between them deciding to do it and not. And if it feels too hard to actually do it, then the step before is a good start. You could go to couples therapy and have a conversation, a couple of sessions on it to prepare the conversation. You could just do it between you. Their couple could do it. But I would also echo Emily in the saying is this is not something that you can do for them, or it's not a role that you can take on. It would probably do more harm than good.
And you say his wife is estranged. So I don't know what you mean in that context, but I imagine that makes it more complicated to have a kind of joint narrative, because it doesn't sound like a easy separation or easy communication.
And if the dad decides to communicate, I would include the estranged partner, let them know, and ideally do it together.
And plan it together, what they're going to say. So there is an organisation that it might support you, because it sounds like you need support as well. It's called a Donor Conception Network, and it's a supportive network of UK families with children conceived with donated sperm, eggs or embryos. Those considering or undergoing donor conception procedures and donor-conceived people. So, I mean, it sounds like it's for before, but I'm sure it's for after as well, or I imagine it's for after as well.
Right. And I imagine there's also sort of groups out there of people who are either parents of donor-conceived or who are children of donor conceived.
Yeah. And my final thought is really that the role that you can play is to be a good aunt to your nieces and nephews. Having strong relationships, having supportive relationships, if and when this comes out, or when this comes out, you can be someone who can then be there if you've been thoughtful about it yourself and they have a good, strong relationship with you. That's probably the role that you can play that is within your agency and your remit, is to be a supportive person when they face hard stuff, whether it's this or something else.
And this probably isn't within your gift, but I interviewed Terry Apter yesterday, who's written a book called Grandparenting. And what her research shows is that grandparent relationships with all young people is both good for the grandparent and protective against dementia, but very good for the grandchildren. And there's new research that shows young men, like teenage men, have a particular bond with grandfathers, which is very powerful and useful for them, because it's a kind of like a different dynamic from their own dad. And so if you can encourage family system closeness by having them over for lunch with the grandparents or other people, that's good too. So thank you very much for the question. And I can hear how hard it is to hold a secret. And I think secrets are really complicated. But when it's not your secret, it isn't your secret, even though you've been given it. So finding support for yourself, like Emily and Sophie have said, I think is an important part of it too. But thank you for asking, and I'm sure it will generate a lot of conversations with people listening about sperm donors and donor-conceived children, which is definitely on the rise. So it's a growing, more common process. So thank you very much.